Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. This week we talk one-on-one with Jackson Councilman Ashby Foote about the city's new RFP for garbage service and his priorities in the coming new year. And Jackson State history professor Robert Luckett considers the 2023 general elections and what they tell us about black voting power in today's Mississippi. That's all ahead this Sunday on Mississippi Insight. Well, let's get straight to the discussion with Ashby Foote. The councilman represents Ward 1 in Northeast Jackson, and he chairs the council's Finance Committee. Councilman, welcome to Mississippi Insight.
Thank you, Byron. I appreciate the chance to be here with you.
Let's talk. Mayor Chuck Lumumba issued a new request for proposal for a city garbage service in Jackson on Thursday. Jackson's contract, emergency contract, which is disposal, expires in March. Are you satisfied with the timing of the RFP?
Well, I wish it had been sooner, but I'm glad we finally got the announcement from the mayor, and the RFP came out in the last 24 hours, and I've had a chance to review it. So I think that's a good step in the right direction that will hopefully get through this in a way that doesn't cause too much drama or anxiety amongst the citizens.
Tell us a little bit about this RFP and what's in it and what you are looking for and what the mayor has in the RFP right now.
Well, we went through an RFP process that started way back in 2021, and it didn't go well. For a variety of reasons, the mayor decided to take another route, and he gave the Richards contract the notice to proceed, even though the council had not okayed it, and we ended up in the court system because of that. So what we need to do is stay within the laws that are set up by the state government to run the RFP. They're very specific about RFPs for garbage contracts. It's one of the most expensive contracts the city lets. Can easily be over a period of 6 years, $40–50 million. So it's important to do it and do it right and not get tangled up in the court system again. So I've reviewed it. I've got some issues with it. Hopefully we can work them out that will be satisfactory for both the council and the mayor.
So what is in this RFP that you like, and what is it that you don't like? And when we talk about the cost, the mayor said that this will be more expensive than before. So what are our citizens of Jackson going to be looking at?
Well, you know, I'm hoping it won't be more expensive. I mean, with the last year, the last 18 months, has been the most expensive garbage collection the city's ever had. So we've got to get, emergency contracts are more expensive because garbage is a long-term business because it requires a lot of capital investment. Trucks that get amortized over a period of 15 years. So it's important that you have a long-term contract to give the vendors the opportunity to cover their cost over a long period of time. So short-term contracts like we've had, those emergency, end up being more expensive. And there was a number of bids that were in the $650,000 to $750,000 a month during the RFP we were considering, but the emergency contract has ended up costing us $808,000 a month, and it continues to cost that much through the end of March. So a long-term contract is what we ought to be going, aspire to. As to the specifics, there are a couple of things that I have some issues with. One is the fact that less of the contract is going to be focused on the resumes and the technical capabilities of the vendor. Only 20% or less, actually less than 20%, about 15% gets focused on that. 5% goes to, I believe, to the Equal Business Opportunity Program, and then 20% goes just on what they offer for fees. And there were some specific things within the RFP that I think could be adjusted that would allow for even a cheaper contract. So if you want to get into the details on that, I'd be glad to kind of cover some of those.
How do you assure the citizens of Jackson that we won't go through the process we went through before where there's a fight between the council and the mayor on this issue?
Well, I think the main thing is that we need to be in agreement on the details of the RFP so that when the proposals from the vendors come in, that we can have a level playing field for the vendors and choices for the council and the mayor.
So if there's a disagreement, how do you make sure that you can disagree, not publicly like you had, and fight publicly and back in court, but you can handle something as a council and as the mayor's office and get things done without a public fight?
That requires some diplomatic politics to do that. In other words, be able to talk to each other and work through your differences and come to some common ground. And the mayor proposes to us a specific vendor, then we can vote up or down on that. Now the state statute 31-17-13 states that it's the governing authorities that control the RFP and the selection of a garbage vendor. The governing authorities includes the mayor and the council. So we have to work together, and he needs to get 4 votes from the council in agreement to have a valid contract.
Are you satisfied with what Richards is doing right now?
We've had a lot of complaints over the last year and a half. So there's been issues being a day late for garbage collection and a variety of different things to different neighborhoods. There's some people that are fine with it. There's others that are less than satisfied.
There's a disclaimer in the RFP that notes that any contract may be subject to change due to the suit that Richards has filed against the city. Remind viewers about some of the status of that suit that you're dealing with right now.
Right. So they decided after they didn't get the votes from the council and it ended up with an emergency contract, they sued the council and the city government, stating that we should have voted for them, and that they're wanting the court to decide that regardless of what the council voted, they get the 6-year contract, basically saying that the council really doesn't have a say in this. They say that we were arbitrary and capricious in how we voted when it was brought to us by the mayor. I disagree with that, and I think I'm disappointed that the city legal department has not asked for the dismissal of the case from the judge.
Ideally, when you're looking at a 6-year contract, what are you hoping to spend on a garbage contract? Is it 40, 50 million? What's the number that you would like to see?
I would, obviously the lesser the better you want to spend, but you also want to get, a reliable vendor that can show up every day to pick up garbage when there's supposed to be garbage picked up and be there at a time that the residents expect. My guess would be that if you were to do it at $8 million a year or maybe $9 million a year, that would probably be pretty good in today's terms. Right now we're paying about $10 million a year on the emergency contract, but a longer term contract hopefully will be cheaper than that. But a lot depends on what you specifically ask for in the RFP. There's some things in there I think that make it a little more expensive than it needs to be. And I'm going to try to bring those up in our city council meeting on next Tuesday.
Talk about Jackson Water. Jackson Water announced new water rates that have come out. You just kind of looked at those rates. What do you think about the rates and what's happening with Jackson Water at this point?
Well, let me first say that the city council at this point has no jurisdiction over this, because when the negotiation was done between the EPA, the DOJ, and the city, that was taken over by the EPA. They've hired Jackson Water, set up Jackson Water, and then also the Judge Wingate. So they're the ones who decide the rates, and we can't go in and say no, we're not going to vote for that, because we don't get a vote on this. But it says in here, in my brief review of this, is that they expect the price of water to increase by, I believe it's a daily increase of 71 cents. So that would be over the course of a month would be, I guess, about, what is that, $20 or something like that, something close to that. That's probably fair when you consider all the work that they're now getting done on our water lines. And they've been much more responsive. They've got a lot of resources behind them. The rate matters, but even more importantly for the stability of the system is our collection rate needs to improve from where it has been. And so the higher we get the collection rate, the more stable the system will be and more financially viable they'll be.
Is that improving on the collection rate? Are we seeing an improvement there?
I haven't heard anything lately. The water billing offices underneath or part of the Jackson Water, and I have not heard from Mr. Hennepin in a month or two, so hopefully their collection rate is improving.
We're closing the full year since Ted Hennepin became the city's third-party administrator with the water. How do you rate him, and are you satisfied with what's going on with Ted Hennepin right now?
I'm very satisfied with what he's doing, and I think Judge Wingate has provided a lot of excellent leadership as well in navigating through a really challenging period for the city of Jackson. The boil water notices are way down. The water's plant is much more reliable, I think, and they're spending a lot of time and effort and being very responsive as it comes to busted water lines. We've had a lot of busted water lines over the past 3 or 4 months because the drought, when it dries up the ground like it did when we went through that drought, that shifts the soil and can fracture water lines, and so it's the fact that they're much more responsive, I think, is a really positive thing for the citizens.
What are your policies for priorities for 2024?
Well, crime would obviously be one of them. We need to get, continue to work on the quality of our roads. I think we've got positive momentum when it comes to the water system, the clean water, the drinking water of the plants, and also now the sewer system has been put under Jackson Water and Judge Wingate as well. So I'm very constructive about that. We still have a lot of issues that we need to work on to enhance the business environment for Jackson. We got to continue to work on the situation with the folks that are homeless and need assistance, and social workers to address their needs.
Well, the race for Public Service Commissioner in the Central District has finally been decided, with all precincts reporting that Keith Sanchez defeated incumbent Brenton Bailey in the race for Public Service Commissioner by just over 2,000 votes. The Associated Press called the race for stamps last week after the results from all precincts were counted. All election results were due for certification on Friday. There was a lot said of the importance of black voters going into the gubernatorial race this year. Many Democrats felt that Brandon Presley might have won had he been able to drive voter turnout in such places as Hinds County and the Delta. The numbers, though, suggest that lower turnout in these areas than in 2019. We want to look at the dynamics of black voting power in historical context. Joining me now is Dr. Robert Luckett. He is a professor of history and director of the Margaret Walker Center and the COFO Center at Jackson State University. Dr. Luckett, welcome to Mississippi Insight.
Thanks for having me.
What do the latest elections and turnouts tell you about the terms of the evolution of the black voter turnout in Mississippi and what it means?
Well, historically speaking, of course, Mississippi has the highest population of African Americans of any state in the nation at roughly 37%. And black voter turnout has always been considered really essential in particularly statewide elections for Democrats who are running for office, because we know how most African Americans are voting democratically. The reality, though, has been that in a state as poor as Mississippi, and where African Americans represent the poorest demographic of any state in the nation, that voter turnout has never quite been high enough to push, at least in the last 20 years, right, since Ronnie Musgrove, to push statewide elected candidates for the Democratic Party to victory. And it clearly played out that way again. And I think there are historically racialized reasons behind that, but also socioeconomic ones, of just the function of having to go to work, and whether or not you have a ride to the polls, and whether or not you can take the time off to go to the polls, and frankly, whether or not you see it as a bread and butter issue, as something that can really impact your life. A lot of poor people in particular look at voting as something that's not going to change their everyday well-being.
So what has to happen then? I mean, in this past election, people thought that Presley needed Obama-style support to get people out there, but he got less than Hood did. What happened in that election, do you think?
Well, I think, frankly, what needs to happen, what has to happen if there's going to be some hope of Brandon Presley or someone winning office in the near future, is greater access to the right to vote. That's the real fundamental issue. As we restrict access to the polls, as we have very restrictive absentee voter laws, for instance, as we don't have online voter registration or even mail-in voting options, things like that would ease access to the polls for poor people and working people, that would make a huge difference for candidates like Brandon Presley. Without that, I don't know much will change, other than the shifting demographics of the state of Mississippi and the fact that, like most of the nation, we're a growing black and brown state, right? And as those populations come to be the majority of the population, maybe there'll be some shifts in voting.
So voters going to the polls just on election day isn't beneficial for black voters because of the access to the polls?
I think it is beneficial, and we need black voters to go to the polls on election day. I think due to the demographic nature of African Americans being predominantly poor in this state, it's much harder. It's a much bigger burden for them to go to the polls. And then we see things like what happened in Hinds County with that lack of access to ballots and people being turned away from the polls. That doesn't help confidence in elections. And a lot of people are looking at, this history and saying, hey, we've been able to vote, in these elections, but it hasn't really done anything for us, and so we're not motivated. And clearly, Brandon Presley as a candidate didn't motivate enough voters to then independently go vote on the day of elections as well.
What do black leaders need to do, or what do Democrats or either other or politicians in general need to do to get black voters to the polls and get them motivated?
Well, again, I think a lot of it is related to systemic issues in our voting system in Mississippi. And what I'd like to see is a growing access to our democracy and see the right to vote expanded in ways that makes it easier for people to really claim the rights of American citizenship. So things that make it easier to vote for people would be probably the most important thing that they can do. Can we encourage voting? Yes, absolutely. And there are great organizations and people that are doing good work around getting out the vote, those WJTV efforts, right? Driving people to the polls, making sure they're educated about voting, about if they can't go to vote the days of the poll, how you actually vote absentee in Mississippi, what you need to be able to do to make that happen. So that's happening, and we always, every election must have mobilization around those issues. But again, fundamentally, we need greater access to the polls in this state if you're going to see voter turnout in coming elections and in really kind of current times. If you're going to see that voting demographic change, I think that's where it really is.
Are politicians taking advantage of the voters, or do you think that that's not an issue?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean by taking advantage of the voters. I think politicians take advantage of the system.
Taking them for granted, so to speak.
I think it depends on probably an anecdotal level from politician to politician of who takes advantage of voters and who doesn't. I think politicians generally play to their base, right? They play to their strengths, and if they think a certain political tactic is going to benefit them in an election, they're going to do that, right? And right now, the way our election system is set up in the state of Mississippi, it benefits predominantly white conservative voters and politicians just due to the nature of how people vote and why people vote and the way the system is set up in this state.
So what factors do you think would drive voter turnout in Mississippi besides just changing the way people vote?
Well, I think voter turnout can be driven in a number of ways. One, the candidates themselves have to inspire voter turnout. Obviously, beyond just Barack Obama being a black man, there was something that inspired people to go to the polls to vote for Barack Obama. Whether you were inspired that way or not by someone like a Brandon Presley, he clearly didn't have that same type of kind of inspiration for voters to get them to turn out. So, the candidate does have to have some kind of spark there too, but there really does have to be a machine working in this state to help people access the right to vote. And that is a slow change that is coming. Again, I think probably the greatest hope that Democrats have in the future are the shifting demographics of this state. And as the overall population of the state is shifting, so too is the voting age population shifting. And it's in those cases that you're going to see greater voter turnout for Democrats in the coming years.
Presley had almost $11 million to spend. Why did that help him?
Well, I mean, I think it did help him. He was competitive, and you could see that in the money that he spent on TV, it resulted in really pushing Governor Reeves to have to mount his own campaign in very aggressive ways and to push back and have to spend a lot of money. And so to a certain extent, the funding certainly helped Presley at least get enough attention locally and nationally and across the state to push Governor Reeves into really believing he was going to have to fight for this election, and he did. And so, but in the end, those dollars, again, don't change kind of the fundamental nature of working people and poor people's lives in the state of Mississippi. And for African Americans, it doesn't necessarily drive them to the polls.
Do you see in the future things changing among African American voters, poor voters, that they will be more motivated to vote in the future here in Mississippi, or do you think things just pretty much staying status quo?
I think things will change. I'm actually ultimately hopeful in the state, because if we think about the history of voting rights in Mississippi, the state isn't really a democracy until 1965 in the Voting Rights Act. You know, almost half our population couldn't vote until 1965, right? And so for the very first time in the last 60 years, which historically speaking is not very long, we now have a state that has the most black elected officials of any state in the nation. We do have incredibly high voter registration rates among African Americans. We need more of them to vote and to be able to vote, and creating pathways for them to vote is really important. And again, I am hopeful because our young people are shifting, their demographics are shifting, and as we engage them, as we educate them, as they learn more about the democratic processes, their voting habits really will change.
Dr. Luckett, appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, and we'll be right back. Big thanks this week to Jackson City Councilman Ashby Foote and JSU's Dr. Robert Luckett. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown from all of us here at 12 News. Make it a great weekend.